I'm Jody Moon. I'm a doctoral candidate at Indiana University. And in terms of what compelled me to write the case, in our coursework at IU, the professors often actually incorporate the JCEL cases. So I was familiar with the structure. In terms of my choice for my case, it helps to know the background a little bit. I have a background in management and marketing, but most recently I was a public school math teacher for 10 years before I joined the program. And in the course of that, I was really interested in what I kind of observed. As I came into my district, we were there was a program filtering out, and that was called the Critical Friends Group. That was a professional development kind of support. And I did that training, and I thought it was really interesting. It was interdisciplinary, but it was really on its way out. It only held in a few schools. And then a year or two later, the district decided to focus on mentoring. So I was invited to be a mentor, and I was really excited, and I went through great training. And a year or two later, that just hadn't gone anywhere. But my last 4 years of teaching, our district adopted professional learning communities as a model. And they put a lot of time and resources into introducing this policy in a sound way. So I kind of used that as a way to look at policy implementation. I also, through this case, to me what was important, there were kind of two issues. One, if you read the case, you'll notice that it's the median middle school. Now I'm a math teacher, so that's where it's median. But we were really looking at an average school actually performing a little better than normal. And I thought that was kind of an important contextual factor that we so often in ed policy are talking about really struggling schools, underachieving schools. And really change occurs everywhere, and there's always room for improvement. So that was one important facet for me to incorporate. And the other, I think a lot in my study about this kind of the tension between collaboration and accountability, and professional learning communities as a model really accentuates that tension. So I think that was really what it stemmed from.
What particular points in the case ought to be part of the teaching deliberations?
Well, I'd like to think that there are many, but a few I would like to highlight. One is we talk a lot in policy about unintended consequences, and the case offers several different opportunities to have that conversation. Some of them are very simple. For instance, the school adopts a policy of either no graded homework or no late homework, kind of depending. And incorporated into that, they have a luncheon where students who are not getting their work in have to go eat lunch somewhere special. And it's driven by really well-intended ideas of understanding home life and supporting all students. But you do see that there are unintended consequences from something like that. Another example of that is as simple, in the case, the principal chooses to train one department in this new format of PLCs a year ahead of everyone else. And that we as social scientists do that all the time. It's a very logical idea, and yet if you put yourself in the position of perhaps some of the other departments, that has the potential to have unintended consequences as well. I think especially when you factor in accountability and the emphasis on English and math that we see right now in all of our states. There are a few other factors that I think would be important for someone to look at. One of them, there's a very subtle paragraph in the narrative about the fact that the school has a cross-curricular leadership team, and very little said about that, and that was actually done very deliberately on my part. I think that that's a very important opportunity for leaders in training to talk about where they would go from that position in the case, and talk about, is that should that leadership team be changed? Should the structure change? What could they do to, both in terms of supporting perhaps a grassroots kind of implementation, but also our principal is aspiring to be a transformational leader. He needs to be doing certain things. So that's, I think, one factor of the case I would like people to look at. And then that idea of transformational leader, that's something we talk about a lot. I think leaders in training need to, through looking at someone else's position, kind of think through how does one become something like that. Our key person here, our principal, kind of acknowledges that he's perhaps has some other tendencies that he needs to, work through. So that's, I think, a kind of subtle factor in the case that would be important for people to look at.
Alright, but how can leaders and trainers best utilize the case?
Well, I think I see that this case has a lot of potential in different ways. It's certainly relevant at the higher ed level for teachers in training, and I think it could be looked at if a course is looking at implementation, if they're looking at different reform measures, different policies like professional learning communities, they're looking at leadership. If they're talking about collaboration and trust, there's a lot in this case that has to do with both inter-department and intra-department relationships. So depending on the coursework, there are really a lot of entry points where this case could be used to talk. I would hope to see that there's this perhaps a movement between practice and theory. Certainly leaders in training could be asked to look at a few different frameworks and take that theory to an actual case that practitioners would be more comfortable with than just the theory. So I think those would be useful ways. I would also hope that our leaders in training, the principals who might be exposed to this in their own coursework, would in the future take this back to the faculty. From my own experience and from what I have studied, it's very difficult for us to look at ourselves to talk about what's not working, and it's much safer to kind of put something out here and have everyone talk about it. So as a principal, as a superintendent, it would be very really reasonable to ask a department or a staff to read through a case like this and talk about different dynamics that they're observing, making it easier and more comfortable for them to take it back to their own level. I also believe there are different opportunities to talk about how to look at data, which is not something that all teachers are necessarily comfortable with. And so an administrator could use this both in terms of looking at the school level data, which is presented in the case, but also to talk about if you're implementing professional learning communities, how do we go from common assessment to talking about results to making changes? And I think that is not addressed in the case. That's the problem. That's the crux of the matter. And I think that that's very relevant at the school level as well as at the higher ed level.
So why should readers and practitioners go to JCEL in this case?
Well, I think JCEL has so many cases. I could not even, I thought about it, I'm not sure how many we used in our different classes. And I know many of them address legal issues that are undoubtedly going to be presented, an issue for a leader in training. So I think it's a very logical place, since much of our work in higher ed is preparing leaders as practitioners, not as academics. I think it's very useful to use something that is much more accessible to them. This case in particular, as I kind of already said, if you're looking to encourage a discussion about policy implementation and what works and what doesn't, if you're looking to discuss the complexity of something like that in a way that has many contextual factors, a case like this works really well.